didn't have any real leader other than Joshua. When Joshua died, it was gone. They never had a king. They didn't have a centralized form of government. Each of the tribes had their own makeup and had their own areas. When there was a problem, God provided them leadership in the form of judges. And there were a series of judges, including Deborah, Amalek, Jephthah, Samson, Eli, and Samuel. Many of those names we've heard over the years. There are other judges too, but today I'm going to talk about just one of them, and his name was Gideon. Exactly who was that guy named Gideon? Well, if you look up in the dictionary of the old names, the name Gideon stands for either a hewer or a feller of trees. So in other words, his name means he was a lumberjack. And when you hear a story later on, you'll see that because of his actions, many things fell, including the Midianites. When we encounter him in the Bible, in the book of Judges, he's thrashing grain on the threshing floor to try to keep it out of the hands of the invading army, the Midianites and the Amorites. As throughout the pattern of the book of Judges, the Israelites had once again turned away from God, not like we do. They had had 40 years of peace, 40 years of no conflict after the judge Deborah. When she died, the Israelites turned away, and lo and behold, they started sinning again, like we do. And God felt the need to get another judge, and he called on Gideon. They were being oppressed by the Canaanites and the Amorites at the time, the Amalekites at the time, and other people from the east of Judea. God chose Gideon, a young man from the tribe of Manasseh. Manasseh, if you don't remember, was one of the Joseph's sons. And when the people went to the promised land from Egypt, instead of there being 12 divisions of land, there were 13. Joseph's two sons, tribes, each got a particular land of their own. The other 11 brothers of Joseph each got a land. So there were 13 separations of land because of that particular division, because Joseph was the one that was responsible for saving the Israelites. My goodness, what happened there? For saving the Israelites during the famine when they first went into Egypt. God chose Gideon. His job was to condemn the worship of idols. In other words, to cut down or fell those people who were worshiping the idols at the time and the false gods. Like most of us, Gideon was very unsure of both himself and God's command. He was approached by an angel and was told he would be sent to defeat the Midianites. He tried to beg off. You know what we all learned when we were in the military? When they asked for volunteers, don't put your hand up. We were all told that, but we all got volunteered one way or the other. The reason I'm in the Gideons right now is I got volunteered. The reason I'm the Area 5 director right now is because I always say I was drafted. I got a call from the vice president one day, and he says, hey, how would you like to be the Area 5 director of the Gideons? And I said, I don't think I want to. And he says, it doesn't matter. Your name's already been submitted. You've been elected. So, Gideon was also elected, somewhat like I was. He was tried to beg off, saying his clan was the weakest of all the clans of Manasseh, and he was the least of his whole entire family. He considered himself an underdog, and apparently didn't want to get involved, like many of us, when we see things that God wants us to do. Gideon, also like us, wanted some assurance, so he requested proof of God's will. He requested 2 signs involving a fleece. The first sign was that he would take a fleece and lay it out on the threshing floor. And he asked God, when the dew came, to make the fleece wet, would leave the ground around it dry. The next morning when he went out, lo and behold, the fleece was wet, soaking wet, that he could wring it out. And he went, okay, God, that's one. Now 2, I want to put another fleece out tonight, and in the morning I want it to be dry and the ground around it to be wet. And lo and behold, when he went out the next morning, the ground was wet, and the fleece was dry. So he was kind of stuck. He decided, well, if God proved himself to me, and it's pretty funny that we ask God to prove himself to us instead of us proving ourselves to him, but we all tend to do that. Gideon was hooked. So he sent people out to go to all the tribes of Israel to collect men to come to drive out the Midianites and Amalekites that were invading them at the present time. About 32,000 people showed up. And Gideon was getting them ready. They were going to cross the Jordan River where the invaders were encamped in the valley of Jezreel. God again approached Gideon and said that he had way too many people. That if he took that many people, then they would take the credit for the victory instead of giving the credit to God. So he told Gideon, approach your men. Anybody who has fear or is afraid, allow them to go home. So he did that. And 22,000 of them left. So now Gideon was left with 10,000 guys. And God said, nah, still too many. He said, what I want you to do is I want you to take all of them down to the water supply, and I want you to tell them to get a drink. And this is the way it says in the Bible in Judges 7:4-8. So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like a dog. All the rest got down on their knees and put their face down into the water. The Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home. So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and trumpets of the others. During the night, God instructed Gideon to approach the enemy's camp, where he overheard a Midianite man tell a friend in a dream which God had given the Midianites over to the Gideons. Gideon worshiped God for giving him this revelation and the encouragement that he received as a result of it. He returned to the Israeli camp and gave each of his men a trumpet and a clay jar with a torch hidden inside. He divided them into 3 companies. Gideon and the 300 marched toward the enemy camp. He told them, when I and all who are with me blow the trumpet, then you may also blow the trumpets all around the camp and say, for the Lord and for Gideon. So Gideon and 100 men with his group went to the outskirts of the camp, and at the beginning of the middle watch, when they had just posted a new watch, they blew their trumpets and smashed the pitchers with their hands. When the 3 companies blew their trumpets and broke the pitchers, they held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing, and cried, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. The Midianites and the Amalekites fled, and God, using Gideon and his small army, defeated a much larger foe in much the same way as Joshua defeated the army at Jericho when the Israelites returned to the promised land from Egypt. The Israelites pleaded with Gideon to be their king, but he refused and went home, telling them that only God was his ruler. So Gideon did what God wanted him to do, and there was again 40 more years of peace for Israel. That was the man Gideon. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the men who call ourselves Gideons. Who are the Gideons? You probably associate the Gideons with Bibles found in hotel rooms, and you'd be correct. But you realize that the Gideons are an extension of the local church's ministry. We represent churches by spreading God's word although our main purpose is to save souls through the distribution of these Bibles. I was doing a little research a couple weeks ago for my Sunday school lesson, and I was on a search engine, and all of a sudden I saw a headline that said, the Gideons are liars. And I had to read that. So I clicked on it and opened it up, and it started out. I was told that the Gideons, all they do is hand out Bibles. He says, they lie. They're trying to convert people to Christianity. They're trying to get people to go to church. They don't just hand out Bibles. They think they're missionaries. Well, We are missionaries. We're missionaries of every church that's out there preaching the Word of God. The Gideons were started in the autumn of 1898 when John Nicholson of Janesville, Wisconsin, was in the Central Hotel in Dartball, Wisconsin. He stopped for the night. He was a traveling salesman, and the hotel was being crowded and was practice in those days. They paired him up with another single traveling salesman and gave them a double room. Well, once they got in the room, they discovered that both of them were Christians, and the other fellow's name was Samuel Beloit, also of Wisconsin. Samuel Hill of Beloit, Wisconsin. John Nicholson told Samuel, you know, when I was a kid, when I was 12 years old, I promised my mother I would read the Bible every night. So the two men had devotions together that night. They read the Bible and they prayed. Some people say this was a coincidence. The two men got together like that. Well, I don't think it was a coincidence. I think when you have a coincidence, it's because God decided to remain anonymous. So they decided that they would meet again at another time. And in May 31st, 1899, they met again at Beaver Dam, Wisconsin, and they decided to band together themselves and other like-minded travelers, mostly traveling salesmen at the time, for mutual recognition, personal evangelism, and united service for the Lord. They called a meeting in Janesville, Wisconsin on July 1st, 1899 at the YMCA. Big meeting. 3 people showed up. The 2 of them, along with Will J. Knights. But they continued working, talking to people when they're doing their traveling. And later on, it grew, and they had a cabinet meeting in October 19, 1907, and one trustee went so far as to say that the Gideons should furnish a Bible for every bedroom of the hotels in the United States. So that's where the whole thing came about, furnishing hotels. That trustee said, in my opinion, this would not only stimulate the activities of the rank and file of the membership, but would be a gracious act wholly in keeping with the divine mission of the Gideon Association. The plan was adopted at the convention in Kentucky in 1908, and the first Bibles were placed in the rooms of the Superior Hotel in Superior, Montana. And those Bibles were all purchased by a corporation that was operating in Superior. He found out their plan and he bought the Bibles to place them in every one of the hotel rooms. Now, when I was a young trooper, I used to patrol Interstate 80 up in central Pennsylvania. One night on midnight shift, I was riding with my next door neighbor, who was also a trooper, senior trooper. I was just a rookie. And we came across 2 teenagers on Snowshoe Mountain. And it was cold that night. We pulled over and come to find out they were runaways. We picked them up, we took them into the station, and they were despondent. Thought they had nothing to live for, no one loved them, yada, yada, yada. All the angst of a teenage couple. There was a boy and a girl, by the way. Teenage couple. While I was talking to them, I asked them if they went to church, and suggested if they didn't, they probably should give it a try. The church has sent people that could help them out with these perceived problems that they have. I told them that if they couldn't talk to their parents or their family, there would be somebody in the church they could talk to. I told them that God loved them, even if they thought no one else did. We made arrangements to get them back home and went back on a patrol. We got in the car, and as we started out towards the highway, my partner turned to me and said, "What's all this God crap?" Well, he didn't say crap. He couldn't understand what police work or what God had to do with the whole situation. These were just runaway teenagers. We did our job. We picked them up and we made sure they got home. As it turned out, many years later, I was been promoted several times, and so had he. I was a lieutenant, he was a captain, and we met one day, and he openly talked about God, the love of God, his love of God, how God loved him, and I immediately, and Tom and Dale, and most of you know me pretty well, would know that I would throw this right back up in his face. What about those years ago in Malsburg, when you said, "What's all this God crap?" And he looked at me and he says, "Well, I'm going to tell you something. I was at a morning breakfast not too long ago, and there was a Gideon there handing out Bibles, little pocket testaments. just like this. And he handed me one. He said, I looked at it and I put it in my pocket. I was being polite. I didn't want to hear anything else he had to say. I just wanted to be polite. I took it and I walked away. He says, and I went home. He said, I don't know what it was, but not too long after that, I picked it up and started reading it. He said, you know, I went to church all those years, but I really wasn't paying attention. I was just going through the motions. I did it to please my wife. And I think there's a lot of guys that do it to please their wives. He says, but once I read that book, I really started to comprehend what it was all about. He found God, and he found God's love. This should tell you that the Gideons not only distribute Bibles in hotels, motels, bed and breakfast, YMCAs, and other places where you can go to obtain lodging, but also at various places. Along with our auxiliary, which are the wives of Gideons, we placed them in hospitals, nursing homes, doctors' offices, lawyers' offices, give them to first responders, medical personnel, military personnel, and students. We distribute at fairs and festivals, and last year at the Scottsdale Fall Festival, down in front of the bank, we handed out over 1,200 New Testaments to people walking by. We distribute across the world 1 million Bibles every 4 days in 8 hours. Since the founding of the Gideons, we have distributed 2 billion, that's with a B, Bibles and Testaments. That milestone was actually reached last week on April 28th. We've been shooting for that 2 billion. Now we're starting to work towards our 3 billion. When I checked yesterday, we had given out 2 billion and 800,000. So I'm sure it's probably 2 billion, 2 billion, 1 billion today. The covers of the New Testaments distributed by the Gideons and Auxiliary are color-coded. I showed you this one. This is what's called an institutional one. This is given in juvenile facilities and prisons. We have blue ones, which are the personal workers' testaments. These are given out by our auxiliary when they're talking to people that they meet and have a problem. The red ones we give out in schools to 5th graders and seniors. The orange one we give out, these are sidewalk distributions. We give these out on the sidewalks. We had a blitz in Pittsburgh last year, and in 4 days, we gave away 80,000 of these in 4 days in Pittsburgh. We actually got thrown off the Duquesne University campus because they thought we might offend somebody by handing out Bibles. So we went down on the street and we continued giving them. Because it's the public sidewalk, we're allowed to hand these out. A private property, a school, or something, they can tell us we can't come there, and we honor their wishes. We don't force anybody to take a Bible. We don't force anybody to let us go and hand out the Bibles. We also have white ones for medical personnel, digital and desert camouflage for military. How many of you were in the military? How many of you got a black Gideon Bible when you went in? You remember that? You did, Tom, because I know I did, and we went to the same boot camp. How many of you still have that Bible? I was doing a distribution at, geez, I don't remember. I think it might have been Scottsdale when an old gentleman walked up to me. I use old lightly because I'm not that young myself. Old gentleman walked up to me and he says, "May I have one of those?" And I said, "Yes, you may." And he says, "I got one of these when I went into service in World War II." He says, "And then finally it's just wore out. The pages are falling out and I can't keep it together and I can't read it anymore." And instead of giving him a pocket dictionary, pocket Bible, I gave him this one. This is a large print Bible that we hand out in nursing homes. So even though this is not a distribution Bible that we hand out on the streets, sometimes I give these out, especially to people that are hard to have eye problems. I personally, if I had to read this one, I'd have eye strain after a while because the words are little. That's why they're for young people. Each pocket testament has an index in the front. And what it does is it relates to different topics. We can look to find help if you're having a problem with something. The The last 2 pages of each testament, except for the red ones, have a GPS. Now we all know what a GPS is. It tells you how to get where you want to go. Well, only this was not a global positioning system. This is God's plan of salvation. It'll tell you how to get where you want to go. We have about 300,000 members across the world. We have camps, and that's what we call our individual groups, in 200 countries now. We carry out the same program using the same methods to accomplish the one objective of winning souls to Christ. And even when we do not have any camp members, we still go there. We've recently been allowed to distribute New Testaments in China and in Cuba. And I talked to a fellow that just got back from China, and they have only 3 pastors in China right now that are licensed to preach in a church. One of them has 300 churches, one of them has 400 churches, and one of them has 700 churches. So, any pastor that thinks he's overworked, think about that. What they do is fill the pulpit with lay people. And lay people pay and go to school for 600 hours to be qualified to conduct the services in the church. To be a member of the Gideons, you have to be a business or a professional man and a member of a Protestant or evangelical church. We serve as missionaries to local churches, seeking to go to the far corners of the world to win others for Christ. Our auxiliary members, they're just our wives. Not just our wives. If it wasn't for the auxiliaries, we would not have very much impact, I'm sure. It's funny how there's a lot of misconceptions. When I first became a Gideon, I was talking to a lady in my church, and she said, "You're a Gideon?" I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah." She says, "I thought the Gideons were a cult, kind of like the Moonies." And I said, "No." And I said, "Well, did you ever stay in a hotel?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Did you open the drawer and see a Bible in there placed by the Gideons?" And she said, "Yeah." She says, "But I thought that was just another cult book, like the Book of Mormon or a Quran." I said, "Did you ever look at it?" And she says, "No, why would I want to touch something like that?" So I had to go get one of these Bibles that are placed by the Gideons and show her that it's merely a Bible. It's the same Bible you lose in your church. We pass out Bibles that are King James Version and English Standard Version now. We're not a cult. We are members of all kinds of different denominations. We're not an offshoot of your church. We are a continuation of your church. You might want to ask how we pay for the Bibles. Well, we accept donations from churches and groups when we make presentations. We also have a Gideon card, Bible card program. Tom Bajan back there can tell you about that because he's our chairman in this area. The Bible cards are located in churches and in funeral homes. And if you look in the back of your churches, I bet you many of your churches have a display in the back. Well, those cards are absolutely free. You can use them anytime you want. We provide them for your use. We ask only that if you use one of them, that you make a donation to buy a Bible. And a Bible is presented in honor of whoever you want it to be presented in honor of. We don't solicit funds through the mail. You're never going to get an envelope in the mail that says that we're from the Gideons. You're not going to get an envelope with a dime on it or a nickel or a row of postage stamps. You're not going to get address labels. You're not going to get any of that stuff from us because we don't work like that. I got an envelope not too long ago, a big envelope, and it was from a charity. And it had a calculator and a clipboard. And I thought, if these people can afford to send out calculators and clipboards, how many people do they send them to? Well, I have no way of knowing. But if they have that much money, why are they asking me for it? I've done some research, and there are some organizations that between their fundraising costs and their administrative costs, they spend 85 to 90% of every penny that comes in, they spend on fundraising and paying administrative costs. And 9, 10, 15 cents is all it goes into the charity that they're allegedly supporting. We don't do that. All the administrative costs from the Gideons is paid for by the Gideons. We never asked anybody to pay for any costs. All the travel we do, we pay for it ourselves. Our officers are volunteers. The few positions that are paid at our international headquarters are paid by us. The Gideons pay our dues, and we pay them out of our pocket. Every single red cent that we collect in offerings or donations or from our Gideon card program goes exclusively to the printing, purchasing, and distribution of Bibles. So if you give a penny, that penny guarantee you purchased part of a Bible that is going to go into somebody's hands. The Gideon Card Bible program, Gideon Bible Card program also has an e-card you can send. An e-card, you just call it up at www.gideons.org, send the word, and you can fill it out, personalize it, and send it right away. I tell that, there's a couple young people in here, that's the way they communicate. I said, "Old guys, we still use the paper one, right?" So there's all different ways that you can support the Gideons. We recently started a youth peer-to-peer program. This is called the Life Book. Since we're not allowed to go into schools in a lot of places, and there's a lot of places that they don't want us around, we distribute these to youth groups associated with the church. If your church has a youth group and you would like to have one of these, or have a box of these, or have several boxes of these, all you have to do is go on the webpage here, order it, and they'll send them to you. The Gideons pay for that. Your contributions don't pay for that. We pay for that, the members of the Gideons. It is basically the book of St. John, and inside of it, there are notes. This was given to a group of students and some pastors and some volunteers. And as they went through it, they wrote their notes, and what they did was incorporate the notes in the book. And this is for children. If we give it to a youth group, we give them a handful, and they can give it to their friends. So instead of giving them drugs or pornography or anything else that young kids pass around to each other, we give them something worthwhile to pass around to each other. Recently in Uniontown, a pastor over there asked for 500. He asked for 500 of the life books. And he got a call from the Gideons International down in Tennessee and said, "We've looked at your logistics there and your population and so forth, and 500 isn't enough for you." He said, "We're going to send you 1,000. So they sent him 1,000. And his youth group distributed about 750 of them the last time I talked to him. And to various students in Uniontown, Laurel Highlands School District. And he said it was a fatal accident with 3 kids in Uniontown got killed. And he said, you could not believe how many of the young people from those 2 schools went to this book and ended up coming to him and other youth group members and saying, you know, that book, we want to know more about God, because they were worried about what happened to their friends, sorry about what happened to their friends, and realized it could happen to them as well. There's no cost to any church that wants to use that life book. Now, the Gideons, who we are, members, business and professional men that belong to a Protestant or evangelical church. I have some information here if anybody wants it, pamphlets on what we are. If you're not qualified to be a Gideon, for whatever reason, or if you just don't have time, we have a program called Friends of the Gideons, and you can participate in that if you're You don't even have to be a church member to participate in that. You don't have to be a member of a qualifying church. You can be a friend of Gideon, and we have two kinds. We have prayer partners, and we have financial partners. The prayer partners, there's no cost whatsoever, but you get some benefits of being a Gideon. The financial partners, we ask for a donation of $10 a month for a financial partner. When you do that, you get 12 Bibles that you yourself, can distribute. You also get the Gideon newsletter, you get the e-newsletter, and you're invited to certain Gideon events. You also help get these little books into the hands of people who might otherwise not know God. And I just found out today that we haven't been allowed in the Southmoreland School District for the last 5 years. Well, today I approached the Southmoreland School District, and on commencement we will be there handing out these. We'll be handing them out. Southmoreland has once again allowed us in the schools. So right now we have 4 high schools in our area: Southmoreland, Connellsville, Fraser, and Mount Pleasant. And this year, all 4 on commencement will be getting these Bibles. And that's the first time in 5 years that all 4 have participated. Fraser started last year. Connellsville and Mount Pleasant have been stalwarts. They've taken them every year. If anybody has any questions about the Gideons, all you have to do is ask. I'll stick around and talk as long as you want. If you're at Dartball and you have a question, you got Tom Bajan back there who's a Gideon, and you got Harry McNabb, wherever he's back there, he's a Gideon. They can give you answers. Or you can go to the webpage. It's called Gideons.org. There's all kind of information on there that tells you about the Gideons. I'm going to end today. I'm going to read Matthew 28:18-20. And Jesus came and spoke to them, saying, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." What better way to execute Jesus' great commission than by putting the Word of God into the hands of people who may not otherwise have the opportunity to know Him? We have handed out 8,800,000, I'm not sure the number, in China in the last year since we've been allowed to go in there. They have about 2 billion people in the country, so we've got a long ways to go. In the United States, we've handed out, like I said, across the world we hand out 1 million every 4 days and 8 hours. We would sure like it if you can join us, if you would help us to get more of these books into the hands of people who need it. And the next time you're in a hotel, if you really want one of these, go ahead and take it. We don't mind replacing it. If you have any questions, you can ask me now. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Fred. Who decided for the school or sophomore? Is it the school board decided that we bring the Bibles back, or who was that?
Actually, it was
running now. The new school board, there's like 12 people running.
Actually, it was Dr. Molnar gave us permission.
Was he the only one? Did he start?
He's the administrator.
Yeah.
He's the administrator, and I walked in, I asked him 2 years ago, and he said, "Well, if I do it now, I'm going to get a lot of grief from the school board. But guess what? The people that would have given me the grief are now gone. And I'm willing to take any grief that I get from it, so yes, you can hand it out." So that's what we're going to do. We're going to hand them out. Any other questions? I'll also be here afterwards if you want to talk to me privately, or you want one of these brochures, please feel free to take one. I want to thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. And it's good to see some of you guys that I haven't seen for a long time. Thank you very much.